There are a lot of nationwide ADU rules that are coming into effect that are going to make it easier to build an accessory dwelling unit, home in your backyard, anywhere in the country, or make it easier to finance one anywhere in the country. But these rules often change at the national level, which is why I'm spending a lot of time in Washington, D.C. this year. We're going to talk about new financial regulations that make it easier to finance ADUs through conventional loans from the FHA, Fannie, and Freddie. We're also going to be right across the street where the Supreme Court is actually deciding on the constitutionality of impact fees. The Supreme Court is actually reviewing a case called Sheets versus El Dorado County. And it doesn't seem super interesting to most people. It's just deciding whether these weird things called impact fees are constitutional or not. But the rest of this channel is all about building accessory dwelling units and housing in California. And so we know that as soon as you go over 750 square feet, your ADU can be subject to these esoteric impact fees. And it's willy-nilly. Some cities, regardless of the actual proportional size and impact of the ADU, they're going to charge $11,000 as soon as you pass that 750 square foot benchmark. So the justices are going to review this case on whether that kind of fee is actually an unconstitutional tax or exaction. I don't know. I'll cover all that on the channel as it unfolds. But that's a really interesting example of a nationwide change coming up in 2024 that almost nobody is talking about, even though that makes a huge difference. You know, $10,000 or more on a relatively small cost ADU project can really make a difference. So it'll be interesting to see what the robed justices say about ADU impact fees and all impact fees across this fair land of ours. But it's also important to talk about the possible risk of national reform. Nationwide reform can really stall housing a lot of the time because it's one size fits all, it's very expensive and slow, and it tends to be dripping with party politics. Each of those threatens to stall the housing movement, either by adding a lot of bureaucratic red tape or by creating really partisan issues where nothing gets done. We want to avoid that. So we really want to talk about what kind of housing policies, what kind of narrow reform options are there at the national level where one size fits all is actually a good thing and where we might get a lot of good out of it without causing a lot of harm, so that we can get more housing built at all levels of affordability without slowing things down. Now we're in front of a much less famous building that you've probably never heard of. This is the Federal Housing Finance Agency, FHFA, and they have an oversight role on GSEs, government-sponsored enterprises, like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. So when Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac adopted new underwriting guidelines specifically to make it easier to finance ADUs, that was also influenced by the work being done at the FHFA. In short, if you ever wanted to borrow money for your accessory dwelling unit, this agency has an outsized role at the national level on what you can qualify to borrow and the terms that that loan can have. And just across the street, you've got Housing and Urban Development, who oversee FHA loans, amongst other things, and also just adopted a bunch of new rules to make financing ADUs easier nationwide. So for example, about halfway through 2023, the FHA loan program started allowing you to use something like 50 to 75% of your rental income on specific kinds of ADUs when qualifying for FHA loans. They also added specific appraisal requirements for accessory dwelling units, which in the long run is going to affect all of our valuations because there are those federal level standards for when they're being appraised by licensed appraisers. And to boot, they've added accessory dwelling units to the list of allowed improvements when you're working with specific types of construction loans that have new build requirements or other types of construction requirements. On top of that, Freddie Mac has implemented a bunch of changes. They've added ADUs to their glossary. They've changed their underwriting guidelines so you can use their loans on properties with 1 to 4 units. That's very different than before when it was only allowed on single unit properties. You can also do kind of a takeout loan now, where once you're done with construction, maybe you had a higher interest loan, maybe you did hard money, maybe you did something with less favorable terms. Now you can use a Freddie Mac choice renovation to take out and refinance at the end of that project. Similarly, Fannie Mae's made a bunch of positive changes. Fannie Mae now allows you to use home-style renovation loans to finance ADU construction. They also allow you to use future rental income when qualifying to figure out what terms you can actually get. And home-ready loans now have different qualifying parameters for when you're counting that rental income. So a bunch of positive changes. Now, despite all that good news, there's also a lot of catches. Like the FHA products are explicitly for ADUs that are attached to existing structures or converted out of existing structures, which kind of leaves out all of the ground up new construction ADUs that aren't conversions or bump out. Fannie is only interested if you're doing one ADU. In California, we could do 2 ADUs and a JADU on a lot of properties. But the second you do that second permitted accessory dwelling unit, Fannie's gonna have a lot to say about it, and you're not gonna be able to reach the same financing terms. Freddie's not interested in the loan if you have more than 4 units on the property. And let's not forget, a lot of these products take a first position, which means you'll have to refinance your existing mortgage. If you're sitting on a really great 4% rate or lower, you might look at the 7% rate on these new products and say, that's not worth it to me, even though the guidelines now allow me to use rental income or allow me to build an ADU. It's just not gonna be worth jeopardizing that first position mortgage. And lastly, they each approach this in slightly different ways. Like the Fannie Mae definition of an ADU says the kitchen has to have cabinets, whereas that's not present in California's code or in a lot of other code around the country. You really need to be an experienced expert to talk about all these different lending products where the rules are changing all the time at the national level, and then the laws are changing at the state and local level. I'm gonna link to a really good YouTube channel run by Julie Felsman. I learn a lot from Julie about lending and rates, and whoever you work with, if you want an FHA product, that's not every broker. You gotta find somebody who has that. If you want to work with accessory dwelling units in particular, you want somebody who's familiar with this kind of shifting landscape to be able to walk you through, and they need to be licensed and experienced to be able to do a good job for you. Now, having said all that, I have even more improvements than we can make. I need your help to fix housing at the national level. I'm talking to stakeholders, I'm reading the books, I'm figuring out what policies we can advocate for where we think will do more good than harm, and I really need your help. So you'll find lots of information about how to help in the description below, and here's some of the details.